able to stay centered in all of this through the highs and lows and the emotions of just the entire season and everything that has come with for you now being in this moment now?
I would say my team. I wouldn't be able to walk around with a smile on my face without my team. Wouldn't be able to get up and come to work every day without, having my team with me, having my family with me. They all have their own personalities. They all have their own lifestyles. But whenever we come together, we have fun, we smile, and we got each other's backs, man. Just being able to have that is I'm grateful for that, but now I realize how much you truly need it in the team to be able to just be together, have positive talk, and being able to just try to back each other up. Some people might not have their best games, but you might have your best game, but you still got to uplift your teammate.
On today's show, how the Mavericks can take out the Minnesota Timberwolves to advance to the NBA Finals and what it will take starting in Game 1 to steal home court advantage in this series. This is Inside the Mavs. Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video and subscribe to Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. Let me know how you're feeling about the Dallas Mavericks heading into Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. We got to get you ready for Game 1 between the Mavericks and the Minnesota Timberwolves on Wednesday night as the Dallas Mavericks look to advance to the NBA Finals. They're back in the Western Conference Finals for the second time in the last 3 years, taking on a superstar in Anthony Edwards, the best defense in the NBA in the Minnesota Timberwolves. Meanwhile, the Dallas Mavericks themselves with an MVP superstar of their own, and Luka Dončić, who, of course, finished second in the NBA MVP voting, a second-team all-rookie member, and Derek Lively the second, a superstar, and Kyrie Irving, who has been there and done that and won an NBA championship. A ton of stars in this series, two teams that have earned their way to the Western Conference Final with the right to go on to play for an NBA championship. And for the Mavericks, it's going to be about getting off to a really good start. As we go through our show today, talking about the keys to victory and what the Mavericks will need to do, not just in Game 1, but also throughout the course of this series to give them an opportunity to win against a stingy defense in the Minnesota Timberwolves, but also a dynamic playmaker and scorer in Anthony Edwards, who's looking to put his imprint on what has already been a terrific postseason for him after averaging nearly 28 points per game against the Denver Nuggets as they took out the Nuggets, of course, in 7 games. Meanwhile, the Dallas Mavericks, having taken out the Clippers in the first round in 6 games and then doing the same to the Oklahoma City Thunder in the conference semifinals in 6 games as well. But for the Mavericks, this is going to be about finding a way to get off to a good start. We already know the statistic. Jason Kidd has not won a Game 1 in the playoffs since becoming the Mavericks head coach. In each of the series that he's coached in, they have not found a way to get off to a good start in terms of winning that first game of this series. Well, you say, Kevin, that may bode well for the Mavericks, at least the way it's gone this postseason. You lost Game 1 on the road to the Clippers, but you still won that series in 6 games. You lost Game 1 to the Oklahoma City Thunder, but you came back and won that series in 6 games. Maybe we don't mind if the Mavericks lose the first game of this series against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I would say I would beg to differ just a little bit because unlike what you saw with the Clippers and the Oklahoma City Thunder, you're talking about the best defense in the league in Minnesota, who will be playing in front of a raucous home crowd with an amped-up superstar in Anthony Edwards and looking to put their stamp on this series from the outset. It's going to be about the Mavericks' ability to play with poise like they've done all season long, where they won 23 games in the clutch and have shown an ability to stay calm under pressure. They're going to need that in game number 1. I asked Jason Kidd about how this Mavericks team will have to avoid a slow start, given the history that he and his team have experienced with him as head coach, and what they will need to do to deal with what will be a tough crowd in Minnesota in game one. Here's what Jason Kidd told me about that.
How do you guys avoid a slow start in game one? Obviously, you've had another day of rest, and you've joked about it in terms of what that means for you guys in terms of play on the court. How do you guys avoid that and hopefully try to take the crowd out of it in Minnesota in game one?
We're going to try our best not to have a slow start. Game ones have always been a struggle for us, so hopefully we can turn that around in this series. We'll get an opportunity tomorrow night. But playing in Minnesota is a tough place to play. The crowd is on top of you. It's a great atmosphere, and they got a really good team, and they're well coached. So we got our work cut out, but we definitely know that we've gotten off to slow starts in series. So we want to try to change that tomorrow.
So Kidd saying they'll try to do everything that they can to avoid that slow start in game number one. And if they can, and absorb the early punch of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are going to be riding high off of their 7-game series win over the Denver Nuggets, then this team will give themselves a really good shot to stay in it, especially going into the fourth quarter against a deep and talented Timberwolves team that presents the NBA Sixth Man of the Year in Naz Reid, the Defensive Player of the Year in Rudy Gobert, who won it for a record-tying 4th time, and of course Anthony Edwards, who again is looking to put not only his stamp on the series, but what has been a terrific postseason for him so far, and what he will mean on both ends of the floor. Because as much as we talk about the offense of Anthony Edwards, his ability to get vertical in terms of his athleticism, his ability to knock down three-pointers, his ability to get downhill and put pressure on opponents at the rim, it's what he's also going to be doing on the defensive end, where he's already declared that he's going to be matched up against Kyrie Irving. How Irving responds in the early portion of this series will be fascinating to watch, given how at times he was bottled up by the Oklahoma City Thunder, who made it a focal point to get the ball out of his hands to try to make him a passer and render him ineffective as a scorer. But you saw how that changed, of course, in the closing game, where he was able to score 18 of his 22 in the second half to help the Mavericks be able to seal the game against the Thunder. So for me, number one, getting off to a fast start is going to be key for this Mavericks team. When you look at what the Minnesota Timberwolves are as a total team standpoint, this team during the regular season in Minnesota was 9th worst in the NBA at 14.2 turnovers per game, which means if you're going to be able to have that kind of pressure for the Mavericks, we know how good they were defensively during the second half of the year, where they were the number one team in defense. This is a team that you've got to find a way to force the issue and create turnovers to be able to get out in transition, where the Minnesota Timberwolves were 10th in the NBA in terms of points off of turnovers. Or I have to say, they were 15th in the NBA and allowing 16.3 points off of turnovers. So if you're going to be a Mavericks team that forces the issue against a team that was 9th worst in the NBA and giving up and turning the ball over 14 times per game, and you're going to be playing a team that will give up points off those turnovers, as we mentioned, 16.3 points off those turnovers, you have a chance to be able to get you some easy buckets to be able to make things a little bit easier for you. Part of that is going to be the defense that the Mavericks are going to have to play on Anthony Edwards. I asked Derrick Jones Jr. about that matchup, as we know that he, PJ Washington, are going to take their turns on dealing with the dynamic superstar and what that looks like. And I asked Derrick Jones Jr. what his matchup will look like against Anthony Edwards and what he presents in terms of a challenge and what he'll have to deal with in the course of this series. Take a listen.
And the challenge of dealing with Anthony Edwards in this series, can you talk about his athleticism and what you can possibly expect in dealing with him?
He's quick, athletic, can shoot the ball. I mean, I just gotta pick my spots and be aggressive, be physical, and try to keep him off his spots.
That's obviously going to be a massive key in this series, trying to slow down Anthony Edwards. Much like in the series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, you're not going to necessarily stop Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You're not going to necessarily stop Anthony Edwards, but what you can do is to contain him, to make sure that he's not going off in the ways that we've seen him do in the postseason so far, with multiple 40-point games and his ability to take over games when the Timberwolves have needed him to. The team defense is going to have to be on display for this Mavericks team, not just in game one, but throughout the course of this series, to be able to deal with Anthony Edwards as a playmaker and as a scorer. And if they can, he is really the guy that you look at as the true bucket getter for the Timberwolves. If you take him out of rhythm and get him off the spots and are physical with him and are able to knock him off of the spots, as Derrick Jones Jr. was talking about, you're going to give yourself an opportunity to be able to corral him a little bit, to be able to keep him from having the big games that we've seen him have so far in this postseason. More on this as we get you ready for game one between the Mavericks and the Timberwolves, and the keys to victory and what the Mavericks will need to do to be able to try and either get a split or, hey, let's get greedy and get two in Minnesota. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor of our video and our podcast. Let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs. Thank you for hanging out with us through our break there, and thank you to today's sponsor of our video and our podcast in Aura as we get you ready for game one between the Mavericks and the Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals, with the right to go on to the NBA Finals. The Mavericks back in the final round of the West for the second time in the last 3 years. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Timberwolves, with their superstar upstarts in Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, NBA Sixth Man of the Year, Naz Reid, and a very talented group looking to get to the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history. And one of the things that the Mavericks are going to have to do is to find a way to dominate in terms of the defensive glass. When you look at what the Minnesota Timberwolves are doing as far as their rebounds are concerned, they're 6th worst in the NBA this season in terms of offensive rebounds per game. They only collect 9.4 offensive boards per contest during the regular season, which means, as you heard Derek Lively to begin our show, the Mavericks with Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, and this team will have to collectively rebound as a team and keep the Minnesota Timberwolves off of the offensive glass, limiting them to just one possession when it comes to their offensive possessions in the course of the series. And if they can, that is when they'll be able to do well in this series. You saw at times against the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that is not very good. It was not very good at all in terms of offensive rebounding. When they were able to get on the boards offensively, they gave the Mavericks problems. So that means Derek Lively II, Daniel Gafford will have to avoid foul trouble to ensure that they're remaining on the floor, and between the two of them playing the entire game against this very big front line that the Timberwolves present, because a Timberwolves team that was built to beat the Denver Nuggets, they have not seen this version of the Dallas Mavericks. The last time that these two teams played each other was back on January the 31st, which means obviously they have not seen the Mavericks since the acquisitions of Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. And what we've learned about this Mavericks team is their abilities to defend, but also when they have been dominant on the glass, both on the offensive and defensive glass, this is a completely different team. So you cannot allow the Minnesota Timberwolves second chance opportunities by allowing them to get some kind of rhythm in terms of their offensive rebounding, because they haven't been good at it all season long. Conversely, the Mavericks will have to do the best that they can to be able to get on the offensive glass. We know that the Timberwolves this year during the regular season were number 5 in the NBA in defensive rebounding at over 34 defensive boards per contest. So the ability to crash the glass by keeping the Timberwolves off of it in terms of the offensive side, but also finding some extra offensive rebounds yourself if you're the Mavericks with Daniel Gafford and also Derek Lively, and collectively as a team to be able to steal some possessions and some second chance opportunities. That is going to be big in not just game one, but also through the course of this series. And we mentioned PJ Washington because his X factor is going to be massive in this series. You saw what he was able to do in those few games against the Oklahoma City Thunder, his ability to knock down corner threes, the confidence that he's playing with on the offensive end, and of course what they're going to ask him to do continually on the defensive end. He is a major X factor for the Mavericks going into a series where you look at what Minnesota presents on the other side. They've got a really good point guard, obviously, in Mike Conley. We've detailed what Anthony Edwards is, obviously, with Karl-Anthony Towns and his ability to stretch the floor. You're going to see PJ Washington quite a bit dealing with Karl-Anthony Towns in terms of his ability to be able to defend and hopefully present some physicality to him. We know that Karl-Anthony Towns doesn't necessarily like to get on the block, but likes to stay out more toward the perimeter and be able to shoot, where he's a terrific shooting big man. But at the same time, PJ Washington is going to have his turn on him quite a bit in the course of the series. I asked PJ during media availability, what these first 2 series have taught him and the Mavericks about what they've learned from the Clippers and the Thunder series that will help them deal with the Minnesota Timberwolves in this series and what that could mean for them going forward. Here's what PJ had to say about that.
What have these first 2 series taught you about not just yourself, but this team that can help you in this series against Minnesota?
Just to keep fighting. No matter if we're down 20, up 10, up 20, we still got to fight. And we know they're a great team, great defensive team. So we just got to find ways to take advantage of that.
The Timberwolves are going to make their runs in this series. It's about staying poised and staying confident in the game plans and executing what the Mavericks are going to be looking to do defensively, especially against Minnesota, because when you look at what the Mavericks have experienced, being down 30-some-odd points against the Los Angeles Clippers, being down, of course, in the 17 points in Game 6 to come back to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder in Game 6. This is a team that knows how to remain steadfast in what they are going to do to ensure that they're not quitting and giving up on games. And Minnesota can go on big runs, but at the same time, the Mavericks can do the same as well when it comes to their abilities with Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving, because as we get deeper and deeper into the postseason, it's all about the stars and the supporting cast of those stars to be able to come up, especially big on the road. And that's where PJ Washington was really able to make his mark in the series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, being able to make his stamp on the road, knocking down shots, especially from the outside. And you're going to have to do that at a high rate against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves allow the second fewest points in the paint during the regular season, which means the jump shooting is going to be extremely important for the Mavericks. And one of the reasons why, for some, they look at this matchup for the Mavericks as a bad one for them, because they may feel like the amount of jump shooting that the Mavericks have or maybe don't have could be an advantage for the Minnesota Timberwolves. But if you're the Mavericks with PJ Washington, with Derrick Jones Jr., with Kyrie Irving, with Luka Dončić, you're going to have to knock down shots on the outside at a high rate, particularly from the three-point line, to continue to extend pressure on the Timberwolves, because they're going to not allow you to get inside to be able to finish, with Rudy Gobert's ability to be able to play it out in space, whether it be in drop coverage, be able to get out and show and still recover and cover the amount of space that he's able to. The Timberwolves are extremely stingy in that area. So it's going to be about consistently knocking down jumpers for this Mavericks team starting in game one that will give them confidence that as their shooting continues to hopefully remain consistent, they'll begin to be able to find ways, whether it be working in pick and roll situations. Obviously, we know that Luka Dončić is going to be hunting for Rudy Gobert, drawing him up to try and get him into space to be able to work on him, where we've seen throughout the course of the years when it comes to Luka and Rudy how much Luka Dončić loves that matchup. We will see how much the Timberwolves look to protect Rudy Gobert to ensure he's not getting exposed out on the perimeter in dealing with Luka Dončić, who hopefully, with the extra day of rest, having been able to close the series out in 6 games And then, of course, seeing the Timberwolves and the Nuggets play in that 7th game, he'll be that much more healthy going into game number 1 alongside Kyrie Irving to be able to do so as well. I also asked Jason Kidd about what the first 2 series have taught him about his team and what that could mean for his team against the Timberwolves in game 1 and for this series, and how much he is looking forward to seeing this group that he loves be able to get after it against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Here's what he's had to say there.
What did you learn about your team through the first 2 series that you believe will help you in this series against Minnesota, whether it be from a mentality or a focus standpoint?
Yeah, I think just understanding, their ability to, execute the game plan, and being able to pivot if things aren't going well or things we need to make a change. Just understanding that group can make that change on the run. Understanding that we've been down in the sense of 30-some points to come back to take a lead, to be down 16 at half in Game 6, and to work the game to still believe that we can win. And so there's a lot of trust, a lot of belief in one another, and I think it's a fun group to be around.
So Jason Kidd has learned a lot about this group, their abilities to stay in it and ensure that they are not getting down on themselves based on what they may experience throughout the course of this series. A difficult place to play. It is in Minnesota with the crowd on top of you, and it's going to be loud in that building inside Target Center. But at the same time, this Mavericks team has the mental makeup and toughness to be able to withstand that. You don't get this deep into the postseason without being mentally tough and sharp and focused, no matter the opponent, and especially now dealing with the best defense in the league. The Mavericks themselves can look at themselves and say, we have one of the best defenses in the league as well. The confidence at which we have gained throughout the course of the playoffs and during the second half of the regular season. We talk about how good Minnesota's defense is. People should be talking about how good the Dallas defense is as well, knowing their capabilities and what they have been able to put forward in terms of the results on the floor during the second half of the year and now into the postseason. And that confidence should be able to help them in withstanding the initial wave that the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to present. But this series is going to come down to the Mavericks' ability to protect the basketball and not give the Minnesota Timberwolves extra possessions to be able to control the game from a pace standpoint. Can the Mavericks find a way to increase the pace like they have done all season long, where they were a top 10 pace team throughout the course of the year? This is a team that is good when they get out and run. They force the issue and create turnovers when they're rotating and communicating and causing deflections to be able to get out in transition. This is when the Mavericks are at their best. And finding a way to get Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert into foul trouble, which means having opportunities to get downhill and attack them, to be able to put them in positions where they've got to make decisions about how they're going to defend Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving. And if they can, getting those twin towers off the floor, if you will, is going to be to an advantage for the Mavericks. And yes, I know about guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who is terrific off the bench, Jaden McDaniels, who is a really good defender and will have his turn on Luka Dončić, Naz Reid, who can come in off the bench, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, as the NBA's 6th man of the year, and his capabilities from the three-point line, being able to put the ball on the deck to get out in transition and also provide some rim protection on the defensive end. This Timberwolves team is as talented as they come, and there's a reason why they're here after knocking off the Nuggets in 7 games. But the Mavericks are a talented group, a tough, physical, hard-nosed team that knows how to defend, knows how to play with poise and calm during difficult situations, and they will need to lean on that starting in game 1 against Minnesota. And if they can, whether that be winning in game 1 or losing in game 1 and finding a way to win in game 2 like they've done each of the first 2 series, losing game 1 on the road, but rebounding and winning game number 2. This team has been a terrific counter-punching team throughout the course of the playoffs. Hopefully, they won't have to necessarily do the counter-punching, but be the aggressors. And that would be my final key when you start to look at what the hopeful Mavericks are going to do starting in game number 1. Be the aggressor in this series against Minnesota. You be the ones to punch them in the mouth. You be the ones to set the tone on both the offensive and defensive end, and let Minnesota know that it's not going to be a cakewalk in this series, even though for some, the Timberwolves may be the favorite. Dallas has the chance to be able to steal the early momentum and home court advantage in game 1. And even if they don't succeed in game 1, being able to come back in game 2 and being able to do so. But this is about the Mavericks sticking to who they are, because when you get to the ends of the postseasons like this, into the conference finals, and obviously in the championship round and the NBA finals, your identity and who you are and how you've gotten to the dance will need to carry you on that same dance floor, maybe a bigger stage where that dance floor may be, but at the same time, you've got to be able to stick to who you are in terms of your identity. And the Mavericks' identity is defending, being able to get after teams and force the issue on them, but leaning on your superstars and Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving, where we saw during the regular season, you really can't take much from the games that the Mavericks played against the Timberwolves because of how different really both of these teams are since the last time that they played. Because, Kevin, you haven't mentioned much about the 4 games that they played against each other during the regular season. While there's some that you could take from some of those games, this is about who the Mavericks are versus what they weren't when they played the Timberwolves during the regular season. And in some ways, for the Timberwolves themselves, the emergence and maturation of Anthony Edwards throughout the course of the year, especially on the stage of these NBA playoffs, is something that we've all seen collectively in the postseason so far, which makes this matchup so much fun because of the amount of star power that's there. But starting in game 1, protect the basketball, find a way to steal some offensive rebounds against a stingy defensive rebounding team, being able to turn the Minnesota Timberwolves over and find a way to get yourself some easy buckets, but also being able to knock down outside shots, because the points in the paint are going to be hard to come by with this defense. You've got to find a way early on to knock down jump shots against this team and hopefully get it going from the three-point line, where, of course, the Mavericks have really struggled throughout the postseason so far in terms of the three-point line, particularly, though, Luka Dončić. If this team can knock down enough threes starting in game 1, they will give themselves terrific opportunities to be in position to win these games. It should be one hell of a series starting in game 1 on Wednesday night. Tip-off will be at 7:30 p.m. at Target Center. I will have the pregame show on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network beginning at 7 p.m. And make sure that you tune in. Follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports for all of your Mavericks coverage. We will have post-game shows as well in terms of our recaps in every single game throughout the course of this series, as the Mavericks look to get back to the NBA Finals and look to do so for the first time with Luka Dončić as the franchise guy for this team, and Jason Kidd, of course, looking to help this team move on to try to help them win a championship, much like he did, of course, back in 2011. It's going to be a great series between the Minnesota Timberwolves and your Dallas Mavericks beginning in game 1 on Wednesday night in Target Center in Minnesota. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Thank you again for joining me here on the latest episode. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating. Write a review for it while you're there. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video. Let me know your thoughts about your feelings going into game 1 between the Timberwolves and the Mavericks. And again, you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. This has been Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura.